Well, hello, hello. We are back again for another Wet Ink Wednesday. I'm Matthew Orr of Wet Ink Games, and I have called up and been joined on this call by Spencer Campbell of Gila RPGs. Spencer, say hello.
Hello, it's very nice to be here. Ooh, I like Wet Ink Wednesdays, by the way. I like that
Yeah, yeah.
alliteration. That's nice.
Yeah, we're recording this on a Thursday, and I may publish it like tomorrow or the today because
Nailed
I
it.
missed the week that I missed the Wednesday of the week that this is being recorded, so I might publish it anyway. But yeah, it's our I try to put out a video on Wednesday, and then but you could just as easily be on my other show, which Wet Ink Wednesdays is every other Wednesday, and then you could just as easily be on my other show, which is Other Ink Thursdays, which I it's about other people's games. Um, but since you've written Never Going Home Adventure, which will
Mm,
be part of the stretch goals for the newest release that's coming later this year, you get to be counted as a Wet Ink contributor because you've now contributed to that game, Never Going Home. And we're
excited to
definitely
be
going to
part of
talk
the
about
team.
that. Yeah, we're definitely going to talk about that later. But before we talk about specifics, I want to know general. Like I see you've got a lot of games on the walls behind you there in your space, and so tell me about yourself as a like game player
Mm,
before you talk about before we talk about you as a game publisher.
sure. I've been playing games, obviously, like many of us, probably since I was a very little kid. Also, apparently, according to my parents, I've been making rules for games since I was 5. So I guess it's just kind of in my DNA.
Yeah, yeah.
I love playing games. Obviously, from my big old shelf back there, I play a whole variety of different games. Although these days, I am finding myself leaning into the shorter, faster, lighter games. I used to like getting the big old board game out that's going to take us all afternoon to play, and nowadays I like a real slick two-player game that's done in like 10 minutes. Oof, that's just right for me. That's just as I get older and I have more responsibilities. Uh, but yeah, I mean, I love playing any and all games, and that includes things like video games. Anybody who's read
Sure.
any of my role-playing games knows that I'm a big video game fan, since a lot of that stuff inspires my work. So I love it all.
Well, it's a rare maybe a rare person. I think I tend to think of, I don't know if this is purely anecdotal, right? But like I tend to think that people like board games, role-playing games, or video
Mm,
games are like three categories, and most people only like two of those.
right,
You like people who do video games and RPGs, but then they're like board games, what is that? Or there are
right,
people that are like me, I'm like board game, RPGs. I hardly ever touch video games.
right.
But yeah, I don't know. So you're a person who just takes all kinds. That's
I keep myself busy with play in any way, shape, or form I can.
awesome. So what if you've been writing rules since five, when did you decide to I mean, like obviously you've got Gila RPGs now, and
Mm.
you've got I was on your website earlier, you've got like six things, buy them now, all this kind of stuff. Um, but like, did it start with that, or
Mm.
did you start? How was your into the publishing? Did you start like modules for other people's stuff? Like, where did that start for you?
Yeah, so before I did RPG design, I was working on board game and card game design with my best friend Mike Riemann. Mike's name might be familiar to folks because he does the art and layout for a lot of my stuff. So the new updated Slayers, he did a layout for Reap, which is my most recent thing, Hunt, all sorts of stuff. Um, and he and I became friends over our love of board games, and we tried making board games together, and that was very, very hard. Board games are just so much more complicated, and quite literally require many more pieces
Yeah.
than a role-playing game. And while we had a lot of fun with it, it never ended up going anywhere. And along around the same time is when I started playing role-playing games. So I did not play role-playing games when I was a kid.
Hmm.
I didn't know anybody who did.
Yeah.
Um, so I didn't play RPGs until I was in grad school. So once I got into grad school, that's when I got introduced to it in the first place. And I was playing with a couple of different groups early on. And one of the groups I played with was my brother and his friends. They're all Chicago improvisers. which is a
Okay.
very fun group of people to play with. Um, and at that point, I was already immediately hacking the games that we were playing, making new. We were primarily playing Powered by the Apocalypse games, so making new
Yeah.
playbooks and things like
They're
that
hack
to
friendly.
extremely hack friendly. And so it was an easy way for me, or a more straightforward way for me to even dip my toe into the idea of design. So I started by doing our own little internal, never published any of it, but our own internal playbooks and stuff like that to play some PBTA games. And after having some success and fun with that then I thought, okay, well, what if I were to actually make something that is of my own design? And then it kind of just exploded from there.
Yeah. So what was the first one then? Was it Lumen? Because I was looking at
Mm,
your catalog, and Lumen
yeah,
is like you've got other games that are based on Lumen. So did you start
right.
there and it's kind of branched out, or was that what was your first? Which of the ones that are available now is your earliest
Mm.
one?
My first game is a game called Score, which I released about 4 years ago.
Wow.
I funded it 4 years ago as part of, I think it was the first Zine Quest. If my
I,
I don't know, the
yeah, I
last
mean,
3 years was hard to remember. So 4 years ago is really hard. But I think it was during the first Zine Quest, and so I released a game called Score, which was a game about heists, pulling off big bank robberies and things like that. I made my own system for it that had these really weird dice pools that you were making that had like good dice and bad dice, and you were looking for outcomes above and below numbers. And that was my first game that I released. And yeah, it was like a zine length game, a zine quest. So I think it was something like a 36-page game. It was nice to start with zine quest because it had a scale that I think was manageable to think of for my
mhm,
first thing. I think a lot of folks make their first game and it just kind of gets bigger and bigger and bigger because you're just like, I want to try and account for everything, and I
right.
got all these ideas, and you just start cramming them all in, and then you end up with like a 200-page tome
Yeah,
for your very first thing, and that can get unwieldy. But by saying, okay, it literally has to be, it can't be more than like 36 pages,
right.
otherwise it gets too big for zine format. That helped me a ton with figuring out my first thing.
Yeah, I am one of those people that like the first game that my Brandon and I my partner in Wet Ink, uh like our first book is like 250 pages, and it's got
Yeah.
like fire damage rules and
uh
like a huge bunch of vehicles and all these different kinds of like guns you can have, and like we have moved away from that because
mm,
that was a lot of work, and that is a certain style of game, and I sometimes long for how crunchy that is when you're going to be like, here's the airplane and the vehicle and the tank and the truck. It's different from the regular car, and they all matter because of different things that you're trying to accomplish, and like how much,
hmm
you know, we just don't but it's obviously, yeah, a lot of work. So I agree now that I've done it that way, that
Yeah.
start small is a great way to do it. Um, because yeah, it's like, I mean, it's about like getting to the finish line for me when you do a small project, right? You're like, I'm going to do this thing. It's going to be a one-page game. Then it's one page. You wrote it. It's done. Congratulations, you made a game.
Right.
It's done. It was one page, and it's not like you can't like really sell it at a volume at a price where you can sell enough of them that it like you're going to quote unquote succeed as a game
Right.
designer with a one page game. But that at that stage you're not worried about that stuff. You're just like, can you do a game from start to finish? Yes, I've done
Exactly.
one. Now my next one can be 8 pages, the next one can be 32 pages,
Hmm.
the next one. um yeah, and you build you experience and stuff like that the whole time. So
Yeah, exactly.
yeah. All right. So what which of the ones that you have that are on there um really kind of, I don't know, is there a game that you would call like uh your flagship game at
Mm.
this point? Like what's the one that, like, I mean, been if your first game is only like 4 years ago, like you've got quite a repertoire already. So that's congratulations on that.
Thank you. Yeah, I can't stop. I once I started, I literally couldn't stop. And it also fortuitously lined up with the start of the pandemic. And so it
Mm,
was one of those things where I just suddenly had a lot of time and we were all just at home with our own thoughts. And I think to save myself, my brain said, "You're gonna just do this now, and this is gonna be the thing you think about all the time." And so I just wrote. I wrote and I wrote and I wrote. And yeah, the last 4 years I've made a lot of stuff as a result of it, which now I can't fathom trying to maintain the rate that I like
mm,
began with,
right.
trying to rein it in now. But even still, the brain doesn't stop. The flagship game, or like the
I mean, you may not
that
have one, but
yeah,
like
yeah.
that is sort of like,
I
um,
think there's like two that come to mind for
yeah,
me. One is Slayers, which was one of my earlier games, which I think is a representation a lot about the reason I'm choosing these two games is they highlight where I get a lot of my inspiration. So Slayers
yeah, yeah,
comes from my love of board games. So one of my favorite board games is Root, which if folks aren't familiar with it, it's a game where a bunch of forest woodland factions are trying to win by controlling various elements of a board. It's very, very fun, but what it is also extremely asymmetrical, meaning each player is playing essentially an entirely different game from everyone else at the table. I love that. And I
mm,
never saw that in a satisfying way in a role-playing game. And so Slayers is my demonstration that we can let the players have these really bespoke, unique experiences from one another, and still be playing the same game and still have that really satisfying role-playing experience, because we know we can do it. The role player or the board game people figured it out,
yeah,
and video game people figured it out. Role-playing people just needed to figure it out, or at least I hadn't seen anything that
yeah,
scratched the
yeah.
itch the way that I wanted. And so I'm really proud of Slayers, and there's just like a ridiculous amount of third-party Slayer stuff. Like people really resonated with the idea of being able to just make whatever weird mechanic they wanted, and you could make a whole class out of it, and it would still work with the system. So there's so many cool creative things that folks have made. So like that stands up to me. And then the other one that stands up to me is Nova, which is my first like full proper Lumen game when I after I made the Lumen system. And Nova is sort of the flagship for me because it represents a lot of what I think about in game design in terms of like very quick to learn, very quick to play. The sessions are really not designed to be much longer than like 90 minutes to 2 hours max. It's a fast experience. It's a relatively focused experience. It doesn't try to be more than what it is. The other reason it's sort of the flagship is because it's in a setting that I created, and I have a lot of fun playing with that. And so I have released a lot of supplements or spin-off games that are part of like this Nova verse, so that there are
Mm,
ways that you can kind of engage with this setting in ways that are beyond just the Nova role-playing game. There are other games. I'm trying to make card games. I'm trying to make, even though I didn't
yeah.
learn my lesson about the card games four
Well,
years ago. So
look, but
well,
yeah,
surely it'll be different this time.
you're more experienced now.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so I mean, I have so many questions now. Like, I want to know more about Slayers and like
Mm,
what, like, how different are these classes? Like, because like
mm.
when you say that, what I'm imagining is like, well, I my power is this. I don't know what kind of setting is for Slayers, but like I've got this like earth shaking, like tap on the ground power. I'm going to roll d10s, and that's going to be like a percent of like that's like a whatever. I don't know. I
Yeah.
just, and then somebody else is like, okay, well, I've got a deck of playing cards, and I'm going to
Mm,
put in six jokers into that deck of playing cards, and then that's like divides my deck into these like phases, and then like I'm gonna like for each level of joker that I have, I'm like more and more intangible, and like I have to kind of power up until like I can be totally intangible at the end of the is I mean, is that kind of the kind of stuff you're talking about, or is it like
it
less?
can reach that extreme. There are people who have made third party classes that go that far. The basic premise is Slayers ultimately assumes some sort of dice rolling, but there are people who have figured out how to do it with the deck of cards, which is very cool. Um, And any die, regardless of the size of it, that rolls a 4 or above is a hit, meaning you succeed in whatever the thing is.
Hmm.
And so every class then is rolling different numbers, different sizes, rolling different ways for their dice to represent this. So for an example, the Blade class, this takes place in like a fantastical city in your Monster Hunters. And so like the Blade class is about combo. So they're about an exploding die mechanic where the die explodes and they get to keep hitting and hitting and hitting. And so they're trying to figure out how to get themselves in an advantageous position to get the most explosive dice. The gunslinger literally puts a circle of six-sided dice in front of them. Those are the 6 bullets in their chamber, and they are
Hmm.
picking them up and rolling them and literally reloading them back onto their character sheets throughout the fight. The tactician rolls a giant pool of dice that are like D8s, D6s, D4s at the start of the fight and is playing orchestra conductor throughout the whole fight, swapping out dice rolls from the players and the monsters with their pool to manipulate the fight in whatever way they want. And so
Okay.
everybody, those are some of the core classes.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
then like I said, there are people who've come up with wild like dice stacking mechanics. So they're how high
Dexterity,
you
love
can
it.
stack it, and then like when it falls, how many 4+s is the outcome. Or people have figured out how to sort of represent the concept of 4+ with a deck of cards. And so you get this weird card shark class that is able to just have their own weird little game. Essentially, everyone's playing their own mini game,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
you. The reason I like that is not only is it fun, it also lets you feel like your class more so than a game where it's a universal mechanic that applies to all classes. Like roll a d20 and add a
right.
modifier in D and
And
D.
I mean
You're
the guy shooting arrows from the back is literally doing exactly the same thing at the table as the barbarian up at front swinging an axe. It's roll
exactly,
a d20 and add a bonus.
and
It's
it should feel so
yeah,
different.
yeah.
The other advantage of this is that then all of the classes can be different in their level of complexity. So this is the thing I think a lot about because I'm a cognitive psychologist by trade.
All
So I
right.
think about what people are able to literally think about. That's what
Yeah,
cognition is. And so cognitive load is a big part of my design process. And so people can choose simpler classes. You can design these bespoke classes that are a little bit easier to engage with, that you're not tracking as many weird little micro games going on. But then there's some classes there's a lot of buttons and levers that you can pull and push, but you can buy into that level of complexity, and those
right.
two players can sit and play the same game together, which I think is really valuable.
Yeah,
As opposed to we as a table have to find a game that fits the level of complexity or crunch that we all agree is the thing that
right,
we
right.
want to buy in on.
Yeah. That's a really yeah, I also have never heard of a game that is trying to do that that hard, like
Mm,
I just happened to read I mean, I didn't wasn't reading it. I mean, I didn't just happen to read it. I didn't accidentally read a book. But I read Phoenix. I read Phoenix Dawn Command. I just finished it recently. But that's it's got a you got your deck of cards and like that's your character class and you shuffle it in there and you can make you're drawing cards and making adding the pips basically. I've got the 6 of this suit and the 8 of this suit because both of those suits apply to what I'm trying to do. But and different character
right.
classes have the different cards in there to adjust kind of how they play. But ultimately, it's the same. It's different cards, but it's the same. Obviously, mechanic of like I've got a bunch of cards. I'm going to draw 3 and see how big my attack
Right.
is. So anyway, that's like an example of somebody kind of going in that direction, but not as much as this. Not as much as this. Uh, so the other question that led me to when you were talking about it was the other people have done other classes. So
Yeah.
like do you how much of that is like a part of your process where you're like, well, here's the basic rules, have at it, and is there
Mm.
like are is that just something that I mean, are you centralizing like here's my website where I've
Mm.
hosting third party content, or is it just sort of like it's on Drive Through RPG or Itch and it's just labeled as like related to your product? Like how do you I mean, I don't know, like
Yeah.
how has that been for you, like that like letting it out there into the world? Like how do you
Whenever I make a game, most of the games that I make with the hope that other folks feel compelled to make things for it. Just because that's how I got started, was making things for other people's games, and I found
Yeah.
that really helpful. So I try to make games that are also approachable like that for other would-be designers or new designers or even veteran designers who just want to try a different take on making something. When I make these things, I just give blanket permission for people to just make whatever they want for my stuff. They don't have to, um, they don't pay for a license
Mm.
or sign a contract with me or anything like that. I want people to make things rather than worry about the legalese or the
Sure.
connections between our stuff. I have on itch collections that I have just so that other people can find these things. So I have like a Slayer's third party collection that anytime somebody makes something, I encourage them to reach out and let me know, just so that I can add it to that collection, so
Yeah.
that I keep that collection linked on the actual Slayer's page, so that if people are like, hey, this game is cool, what else is there? They can go, oh, wow, there's these dozens of other things that other people have made. This is cool. They can
Yeah.
find it. But it's not perfect, because I always end up finding another Slayers thing. And I'm like, I didn't know this existed. And it was released like 2 years ago. And so that's primarily how I sort of collate it, is I give just sort of blanket permission for folks to play with the games, play with the design of the games. And if they want to be part of a collection, they're free to,
Yeah.
because it might help them get eyes on their stuff. I try and help with that as much as I can. And for a few of my games, I also release like a creator kit alongside it. So a design doc that's not an SRD, but just a, hey, you want to make some stuff for this game? Here's some ideas for things that you might make. Here's some general advice that you might use. And then if I can, I oftentimes try and present or provide a literally like an affinity template that they can use
Mm.
if they want to try and mimic the layout style of the game. It's not required of by any means, but I know it certainly helps me to have a template
Sure.
to build on. So
Yeah.
um
I mean those.
uh,
Yeah. I mean that. So so it sounds like you offer quite a lot of support for sort of like having a third party basis and um yeah, that's interesting because
I mean, yeah, we see, like, look at games like Mothership, right?
yeah,
Mothership
well
and
that's what I was thinking of.
Morkborg
Yeah.
they're cool games on their own, but they are massive because they just open the gates to third-party content for people to make stuff for them. And so you buy Morkborg and you now know that there is mountains of stuff out
Mountains.
there that you have access to. And for the
And some
Morkborg
of that's
guys, that
some of
all
that
just
stuff. Yeah.
it just helps them, right? Like
Sure.
it doesn't hurt them in any way. And it's just, hey, there's more stuff out there to celebrate this cool game. And maybe you actually find one of those supplements before you find the real game, because it was made by a
Right.
designer that you really like. And then that helps you trace it back to, oh, they made this thing for this thing called Morkborg. I wonder what that is. And now suddenly they're looking at they're going down the rabbit hole.
Yeah. I Morkborg is like almost a special case because it's sort of like it's immediately like replicated and also parodied and also iterated on
Hmm.
and like like there's I, I don't know, the friend of mine did a game last year called Mork Corp, and it was like
Mm,
it's the corporate hell that you wake up in after you die in Morkborg,
right.
but like mechanically it's not really related at all. It's just sort of
Mm,
it's mostly a joke, and
right.
but but it's in that like universe. That's what I mean by like parody, right? It's
Yeah,
like
yeah.
there's so many of them. But then there's tons of adventures. Like this adventure is supposed to be played in Morkborg. It's some castle
Hmm.
you got to explore or whatever. Yeah, it's a real. I don't know. It is that like do those relationships then? I mean, do they become relationships or are they just like hey, cool buddy on Instagram or not Instagram on itch,
Yeah.
we're linked on itch and have I'm glad you're having fun and that's it? Or is that like then become like a designer pool where you're like, all right, I loved your stuff, let's go halvesies on this next project and I'll write this part and you write that part and it'll be this new thing? Like have you done that?
Yeah, I have.
Awesome.
That's the cool thing, is like, by and large, it's a lot of people who are just making stuff, and I'm like, this is cool, awesome. And what I say this all the time, people always make cooler things for my games than I can make. Like I truly believe that other people are better at making stuff for my games than I am. And so that again, that's why I just make it so open for them to make things, because I like to be amazed by what I'm always surprised by what the system can do, because other people find things that I wouldn't have thought about.
Mhm.
So there's that part of it that is just part of the joy of doing it. And then I have formed relationships and friendships with people as a result of this. So, we did a Slayers Almanac, which was a supplement of 10 new districts for Slayers. And part of selecting that group was seeing people who had already established themselves as people who had made Slayers content, and I went, oh, I know you can do this, and so you should join the team. And that just recently happened with Reap as well. So, Aaron Jolliffe, who has consistently made awesome stuff for all of my games, just because he enjoys doing it, he's a very good designer. He's really good at making Rune content. And I said, well, Reap is coming, and you make really good Rune stuff. Can I add you? Do you want to join this team? And so
Yeah.
then that formed a relationship, and so he got to be commissioned as one of the writers for the team.
Awesome. So I did want to ask about Rune also, because I told you before we started recording, I've been last year, 2023, I jumped into solo games with
Mm.
like hard, and I'm on my, like, I don't know, 25th or 26th solo game or something like that
Wow.
over the last few months. I mean, some of them are very short. Some of them are very short, like
Right.
but some of them have been bigger and chunkier, and so Rune is, I'm aware of Rune as like a thing. But I'm looking at the page here, and it's like a Souls like
Mm.
a solo experience thing. And I know you mentioned like your video game, pulling from video games and stuff like that. So I know enough about video games to know that that's what Souls like means. Um, so tell me a little bit more about Rune, and then maybe you can, once we know what Rune is, you can tell about Reap and
Yeah.
what's coming there.
So Rune is, yeah, like you said, it's my solo Souls-like game. It is, lots of folks have tried to tap into remaking the Souls-like experience in a role-playing game, and I think there's lots of things that make up what a Souls-like game is, and this is my love letter to it, my interpretation. Um, Before I talk about that, one thing to kind of note about Rune is, for me, it is, because you mentioned like this kind of the spectrum of solo games. To me, it is a chewier or a chunkier game. Like it has a little bit more mechanical heft to it, which is something that I personally crave in my solo games.
Yeah, I'm picking up on that. You're kind of you're a real, you're on the technical side of RPGs more than the narrative side. Not that you're
Yeah,
not narrative, but like I'm just
sure.
getting that vibe that you're
Oh
more
yeah,
like,
100%. I love my rules. I love my mechanics, and I love, even if there's not a lot of them, I like them being crafted for a purpose. And so Rune was my attempt to take the Souls-like experience, which, that's things like Dark Souls, Bloodborne, Elden Ring, things like that, which are these very lonely games. They're lonely games about a person wandering through what is oftentimes a pretty terrible place. The world is doomed or dying or just kind of dreary.
right.
And
And you could be dead and like just keep going, right? Like that's kind of part of the
that's
experience. Like there's sort
that's
of,
the other big part of it. So like the two main components that I hold up in my head of Souls-like games are this lonely adventuring between places, which has a lot of environmental storytelling, meaning these games are so not clear in terms of what is going on in the story. You have to figure it out by looking at the scenery, reading little flavor text on items that you pick up, and you really make the story yourself based off of these breadcrumbs that they scatter
mhm,
around. So there's that element, and then there is this brutally difficult combat, which
right,
is, to me, I like to think about Souls-like combat as almost like a rhythm game or a dancing puzzle, because enemies have a big part of the game is learning their move set. They have an X number of things that they do, and it's about finding the auditory and visual cues that let you know, okay, they're about to do the really big swing down attack and I have a window to hit them once after that, or oh, they're doing the attack that I absolutely need to like clear as much distance between me and them as possible before the attack triggers. And so it's like a dance. You
Hmm.
are dancing with the enemy, finding these windows to attack them. And oftentimes there's a lot of stepping on the toes as you're learning that dance, and you die a lot. And that's part of it. But when you figure it out, you figure out how an enemy works, and you defeat them, it's very, very satisfying. It's an incredibly exciting moment for you to stand up and cheer when you take down this boss that has been haunting you for like 20, 30 deaths in a row. Um, so Rune is my attempt to try and take those concepts and bring them to a role-playing game as a solo experience. And so there are these realms that you explore, which are these sort of little microcosm worlds that are represented with points. It's a point crawl map is how it's represented. So these are the major places of interest that are on this particular area of the world that you are in. And as you move between these points, there are pages for each of these points, and there's actions that you can do where you can search and get some items. You can One of the actions is literally called learn, and you increase your lore score because I'm a huge lore nerd when it comes to games. And lore is this abstracted score that kind of represents your character's like understanding of that environmental storytelling and putting things together. And so you're getting this drip feed of information from these actions. And then inevitably you have to fight things along the way as well. And so the game jumps from this, it's not exactly like choose your own adventure, but it is this, you are moving around these points as you want, engaging with the actions as you want. And then this environmental narrative storytelling to a very brutally difficult tactical combat that takes place on a 4x4 grid. And the way that I sort of captured the rhythm game mechanic of this is that enemies basically have cards that show the actions that they do. And you roll a d6 for every enemy at the start of a round. And so you know what they're going to do. Just like in a Souls-like game, you look for the
Hmm.
visual and auditory cues and go, ah, I know they're going to do this. How can I best respond? And then you roll some d6 of your own, and you have various weapons and spells that are equipped to your character sheet, and they also have die values that give you the ability to do things like move and deal harm and block and all that stuff. And so it's about assigning the dice that you roll to those values to puzzle out what's the best possible way
Yeah.
that I can respond to what I know the enemies are going to do. And then you dance around this. It's a very small grid. It's 4x4, so there's not a lot of space for you to run away. So it is, how can I best in this tight, tense environment survive this fight and hopefully take down my enemy and be able to move on to the next point.
Yeah. So this is this is moving up my list as you're talking about it, because like I've not played anything. I've played a couple that have map elements. I've
Hmm.
played some that have. I've played one that had like this real like it used fudge dice, and it was like you have to pick the least worst option out of every,
Okay.
you put out a spread of cards and you roll some dice and you're like, okay, well, all of these options are terrible. So like it doesn't matter which of these I pick, but on this card,
Right.
there's one good one. So I want to spend my highest die on the one good thing that I have in my spread, so that puzzle solving thing. But then the tactical grid element, and I don't know, it sounds fascinating. So it's already on my like, when
Nice.
I run out of stuff that I can play that I have, I need to buy new stuff. So
Right.
it's not coming off the list. It's staying on the list. That sounds great. So then you were talking before about, I mean, obviously we could talk about a bunch of stuff, and
Mm.
but there's a couple things I still want to talk about. So you talked about this partnership with somebody who was the creator of Rune stuff. So
Yeah.
I mean, if you want to, like, what is Reap like a forthcoming project, or is that like still in
Yeah.
production, or like what's the iteration on Rune that then you got this former fan, now collaborator, to help you with?
Yeah, so I actually Reap just launched like a couple weeks ago. So it
Okay.
kickstarted last year, and the books came in and they're out. I finally got them all out of my house,
Nice.
which is a nice feeling. Um, and basically Reap is it's a rune hack. So it's the same sort of assumptions, But rather than being sort of this undead soldier, which is what you are in Rune, you are a necromancer. It takes place in the same world, but a little bit further in that world's timeline where it is truly dying. And so you're a necromancer. And so it has a lot of the same trappings and core assumptions and mechanics of Rune, but there are some new things that have been added to Reap to kind of lean into that necromancer build. So one of those things is, for example, when you take down
That's the
enemies.
name. That's the name.
Yeah, exactly. When
I
you
got
take
it.
down enemies, you can reap from their bodies bone, blood, and body itself. And these are components that you can jam into your spells to make them more powerful. So if you have a little bit of bone in your pocket that you've collected from another corpse, you can use it when you're summoning a skeleton to make the skeleton a little bit beefier in combat. So it's about finding the ways to best enhance your spells with these new components. This what's called viscera in the game to kind of maximize your efficiency. And then another kind of deviation is in Rune, when you killed the what's called the Rune Lord, the boss at every realm, you got a rune, which was this thing that oftentimes gave you like a one and done power or a small passive thing or something like that. And in Reap, you get a soul, which doesn't do anything on its own, but you can then infuse into your weapons and spells. And so every weapon and spell in the game has a second version, which is like a
Mm.
cooler version that has new
Sure.
powers and things like that. And so just like most Souls-like games, it's about finding the build that best fits you. So some people like to play caster build. Some people like to play really sword, standard sword and board sort of thing. And so when you find those weapons and spells you really like, you go, ooh, I'm going to invest a soul into this and get the really cool version of it instead. And so that's kind of the core premise of the game, or how it kind of evolves on the Rune formula. And so part of releasing it, there's the game itself, which has a realm in it, and then there's the Soul Atlas, which is a collection of more realms for people to play to continue their experience. And for that, I commissioned on a team of 4 writers to create their own realms for the game. They got to design all the points. They made new enemies, new items, all that sort of stuff. And so Aaron is one of those writers who, he had written so many cool third-party realms for Rune. I knew he knew his stuff. Again, I think he's better at it than I am. And so I said, "Hey, Aaron, I'm putting together a team for people to write the official realms for the game. Do you want to make an official realm?" And so I was very happy that he was able to do that. And his realm is, not surprising me at all, is amazing.
Well, I mean, Reap sounds great as well. Like that's another like everything you're saying sounds great. I like that crafting sort of element, the
Mhm.
yeah, collect the stuff and now you've got I'm sure there's a well-designed character sheet that has you where you keep all your stuff tracked or is it like
Oh
that kind
yeah,
of stuff.
my
You like
I hired Mike, my friend, to do
yeah,
the
yeah.
layout, and because I'm not good at any of that stuff, and once again he knocked it out of the park of making a very nice, usable, but cool looking character sheet to track all the viscera, all the weapons and
Yeah.
spells, everything like that.
So I do want to ask you one more question kind of about your work. And then I'm going to ask you about talking about playing in other people's games. I'm going to ask you about
Yeah.
never going home at last. But the question I have about your line is like you've got Slayers, you've got Rune, you've got Leap, you've got Nova or Reap, not
Hmm.
Leap. Like you've chosen in most cases these forward titles.
Yeah.
You're I mean you could still do Luna and like Sola as like a pair of like sun and moon
Luna is
thing.
coming out next
Oh,
month.
is it? Is it?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So there's still some more that you could do there, but like I mean Slayers is longer than 4 letters, but
Yeah.
like is that how did you come up with that as like a thing you were going to try and do? Did that happen
It happened kind of
organically
accident.
or
It kind of happened accidentally. Because obviously, yeah, my first game was Score, and then Corvid Court and Slayers. I had all these longer games, and then I think it happened accidentally where I had realized I made a few like that were 4 letters, and it that were all capital letters, 4 letters, and it felt bold and good. And then I realized why I was doing it, and it goes back to that game I mentioned earlier, which was Root, the board game. Leader Games, all of their games are 4-letter name games, and they're all really good. Root, Oath, Ahoy, um, Vast, Oath, and it's just like, oh yeah, it's just
Yeah.
very punchy. Just this boom. Here's the one word. It
They're
feels good.
almost, yeah, they're almost like it doesn't really tell you what the game is
Mm-hmm.
about, um, but it kind of conveys it's very it's very vibe. It's a very vibe,
It
sort
is,
of like,
right?
you know, and I think that contributes to. I mean, your covers look good as
Mm,
well. Like they're sort of that same sort of like, what is this about? I don't really
yeah.
know, but I know it's like smallness and darkness, and or it's like
Mm-hmm.
about expanses and shiningness, like whatever. I mean, you get that. That's kind of it's it's your brand, right? At this point,
Yeah.
right? It's you've got very similar looking covers, but like
Mm-hmm.
each one is twisted in its own way, and then the one word titles. So yeah,
Yeah, the game Hunt that I released last year, which is like a doomed order of knights going on one last hunt. It's a one-shot game, and it did really, really well at the conventions that we were at because Mike just made this very evocative looking cover that is very reminiscent and an homage to like the Green Knight,
mm,
like the
yeah,
sort of the
that
fonts
was
and stylings. And it
it's
was
good
just
timing.
like, yeah, people would see that cover and they'd go, well, I want to know what that is because
Yeah,
it's just
yeah,
this word hunt and on a very bold color, and they start flipping. And yeah, there's just something about a 4-letter word that you want to know more.
yeah. It doesn't. Yeah. All right. We don't have that much more time together. I mean, we could talk for as long as we want, I suppose,
Sure.
but like I don't want to be respectful of your time. But I want to I want before we get to the end of this time period, I want to ask you about Never Going Home and your
Mm.
adventure, which I forgot to look up the title of.
I think it's
uh,
Birds of a Feather or something
I
like
think I
that.
think it's Birds of
Sounds,
a Feather. It definitely features prominently like creepy crows,
yeah,
and
it's my brand as well.
from and you were talking about like working with third party people,
Yeah,
and like, I mean, not third party people, because like obviously Brandon and I did the initial work on the game, but like from the first Kickstarter, we've had so many other collaborators who have come in to do adventures. Like,
yeah.
I don't know, it's like 60 some different people at this point, which is redonkulous. Um, and uh, and you're part of the newest crop, like
Mm,
we had 22 stretch goals for this most recent Kickstarter campaign. And I think that's some of the people were doing more than one. So it's like 19 different people that I'm
wow.
working with, to like each person is doing their own little bit of contribution. And so it's official, right? But it's not like a third party thing, but it is still like this huge expansive pool of people that you know, and some people have like, we're like, oh, you were you never know, right? When somebody like says yes to a project, you don't know whether or not um how much work they're gonna how much work
Yeah,
on how much back and forth there's going to be before you get it, like them expressing their ideas in your system
right.
really well. But I tell you, I will tell the people, like, you submitted your draft and I was like, oh, there's like one mechanical thing that's like not quite right. I don't see any other problems in here. So like, I appreciate that you like seem to have read the rule book and
I read the rule
looked
book
at
on my honeymoon.
wow,
I
wow.
love like my wife and I went to we traveled and went to a resort to relax, and we would spend our time reading on the beach, and she's reading Crying at H Mart and Crying on the Beach, and I'm reading Never Going Home and going, wow, this is a really good game. We had a great time.
Right. Yeah. That's yeah, you got to read what you like. You got to read what you like. Um
Exactly.
yeah, so I so first of all, I mean, thank you for like submitting an adventure that like was very easy for me to be
Mm,
like, oh yeah, it's done. The formatting was already done, like all that kind of stuff.
mm,
You submitted a great clean manuscript. Um uh but what was so tell us a little bit about it, like in general, and like
mm.
what is the and then we can I want to know what it was like to get to, like, was this an idea you had at the beginning,
Mm.
or did you like where the ideas come from for this particular like haunted crow, creepy crow thing that
Right.
you did? Yeah, so just tell us about it, and what you're bringing in to the never going home family of adventures.
Yeah, so I'm bringing the crows. I'm bringing the creepy crows. This is a thing. I have a crow in essentially every game that I make. There's
All
some
right.
weird crow in it, which is just, ever since I made Corvid Court back in 2020, I'm like, I'm all in on crows now. And I have I've been lucky enough to be a contributor to a handful of projects, and when people ask me, I oftentimes tell them it's probably going to be about a crow, just so you know. There's gonna In some way I'm gonna make this about a crow. And I just find that particularly fun for me to have sort of like a theme that I come back to
Mm,
across different systems, because then I get to think, okay, what do I know and associate with the concept of what a crow is, and then how can I which of those features line up nicely with how this game mechanically works, or the sort of story that is designed to tell. What can I highlight? What doesn't maybe map over as well, or I have to figure out another weird way to map it over. And so for me, it was very fun to try and think about how a crow lines up with something like Never Going Home, because oftentimes we associate crows with the concept of like omens, and certainly the concept of an omen of death. They're carrion eaters. We're talking about a war where there's going to be a lot of corpses, and
mhm.
uh and also in the realm of omens then are the concept of dreams. I'm a psychologist, and so we like to talk about dreams, and even if dream interpretation is all mostly nonsense, it's still a fun thing to talk about. And so to me, I had a lot of fun thinking about how does the concept of what some of the features of a crow line up for me with a game that is very much about this sort of eldritch and mundane horror of
Mm.
war that Never Going Home lines up with. And so those were some of the things that were kind of going through my head. I knew immediately I was going to do something with a crow. I just didn't know what it was going to be. And that's for me the fun puzzle of working on other people's games, is having that theme that I kind of call back on, and figuring out how it lines up with the game.
Well, that's very fun. I don't think I've ever heard anyone say that they've got like a thing like that, that they're like, well, I've tried to do this. I try to do this in every game that I get to work on. That's pretty fun.
It's
Yeah.
it's it adds like a weird, like, it's nice because I know then, oh, okay, this is kind of generally a thing that I like to evoke in games, and sometimes that lines up really nicely with how the game works, but also sometimes it adds like a real weird different way of thinking about the game, because crows are sometimes very different than what the game is about.
Sure.
And then at the same time, I like puzzles. And to me, it's a puzzle then, right? Is
Mm.
okay, I want to do it about this thing, and I know these are the mechanics of the game. There must be a way that I can bridge these two concepts with one another.
Yeah. So just briefly, like, I mean, it's very. I mean, I won't read all the details, but basically, like the crows are like you more the sort of the magpie sort of stealing
Mm,
objects kind of aspect of the corvids, and players are missing things, or characters are missing things, and why are they being taken, and what do they represent? You're dealing with those kind of things, and knowing that you were thinking about like dream interpretation and omens and stuff like that, that
mm.
seems yeah, yes, obviously, yes, that's like, because you have this supernatural environment where, like, yeah, you lost this, like, I don't know, I yo-yo that you brought from wherever, your childhood
Hmm.
yo-yo or whatever, but then like it's been stolen. Like, what does that mean, that like this the memories associated with it, are they now also under threat, that kind of stuff.
Right.
It's real. That's some of what you were playing with in the adventure. So yeah, it's
And yeah, that's some of my psychology stuff too. As a cognitive psychologist, a big area that we study and talk about is memory, and the concepts of how memories fade, how we lose them, but also how they can be warped or how malleable they are. And so I like to play in the space of our memories and how they sort of define us, but how we are also able to define them in the sort of
Mm,
strange loop that connects those two things together. So that was also kind of a fun place to play with.
yeah. So, I mean, this sounds like you need to do like I don't know, a dreamt. No, that's too many letters. But like, where's your dreamscape game
I
that
know.
you're that you've been? Is that one of the on the back burner? One of the ideas you have?
I don't have anything like that on the back burner right now, but now that you've mentioned it, it's going to be on the list now because that idea will haunt me as I try to go to sleep tonight. And I don't know, talk to me in a week, and I'm sure some wild draft will have been put together.
That's right. Start now on the Zine month game for
Yeah,
next
exactly.
year.
Get my head start.
Um, all right. Well, we talked for nearly an hour, but not quite. So I want to. If you've got a little bit more time, I got like
Yeah.
another kind of question that I might want to answer. Or want to ask you about. Like I met you briefly last December at PAX Unplugged. So like you go to cons and but you're from Chicago, so there's
Mm,
like I mean, I don't know how many other cons you I know you go to I know you've been to PAX, but I don't know how
hmm
many cons you go to, and then like is it only, like I don't know. I mean, how do you put it all together, right?
Yeah.
You've got a website, you've got books that you're selling, you're at the scale where I guess well maybe it doesn't make sense, but like you're there at the cons, at least some of them.
hmm
Do you sell a lot of stuff locally or do you sell mostly online? Like what's the I don't know, like obviously we're too late in the conversation to have like a whole conversation about business, but like how do you put it all together for you? Like do you um this is a sideline for you so
hmm
you don't necessarily you can kind of produce stuff at your own timeline? Do you kind of like balance the cost of new books
hmm
with how many cons you can go to? Like I don't know, like
Yeah.
what do you think about when you think about like how I'm going to keep doing this for as long as I want? Or heck, do
Yeah.
you? Maybe you don't. Maybe you just like, yeah, well, the next one makes sense and the next one makes sense, and I don't know.
That honestly is largely how I run is whatever sort of idea or momentum grabs me is just what I run with, and then I let that run for a while, and if it makes it across the finish line, cool. If it doesn't, it'll idle for a while and I'll come back to it. We started doing cons a couple of years ago. We've done PAX twice, we've done Gen Con, we've done Origins.
Yeah.
And the cons are a really fun experience. We like doing I like doing the cons primarily just so that I get to see other people. Like that's why we go to them, is just so that I can see other people and talk to people who have played my games, which is just it's a mind-blowing experience every time somebody comes up to the booth and said, "Oh, I played a Nova campaign and had a lot of fun." And my brain just goes, "That's wild to me." That's so cool. So we go to the cons, we go to PAX, and we're going to Gen Con this year as well. We're out of Chicago. I say we because my friend Mike goes with me to all of these. And so, we're in Chicago, so it makes sense to go to Gen Con
It's
because
not too far away for
it's not
sure.
too far away. And but in terms of like what this like looks like for me, I mean, you might be able to see I have my shelf back there that has other people's games, but then mostly on that side are all of my games. It's all my inventory. I do all my own shipping. I do it all out of my own house and everything for day-to-day stuff, but also for my Kickstarters and everything. I try and largely just kind of keep the stuff literally in-house. The reason is it just helps me keep it at a scale that works for me.
Yeah,
If at
yeah.
any point I want to ramp up, I can. But if I need to step away for a little while too, I'm able to do that because this isn't um my primary job. I'm primarily a professor by trade. And so this is something that I have that freedom to sort of be able to engage with it as much or as little as I want and that because of that it fluctuates so much. Like there will be months where I'm like really in it and I'm producing and I'm thinking so much about it. And then there's sometimes where I'm not doing anything. There's no movement on projects and I can kind of be at peace with that
Mm.
because I am a one person shop for the for the most part. And so yeah, I pretty much do all my stuff on itch and for digital stuff, and then on my own Shopify page for physical stuff, with the occasional Kickstarter to fund bigger projects.
Well, I mean, I could talk to you more about business, I'm sure, but that sounded like a great transition into telling people more about all the places that you could be found on the internet, so that you can, um, yeah,
Sure. I'm on various places online. You can find me everywhere with the username Gila RPGs. That's Gila RPGs. That's my Twitter account. That's my itch page. It's my YouTube channel. It's my Twitch channel. It's my website, GilaRPGs.com. So if you just punch in those letters, you should be able to find me on various places. In terms of picking up my games, I do all my digital stuff on itch only, so you can find my digital stuff on itch, and then physical stuff I have on my own website, which links to my Shopify page. I have a few things that are at Indie Press Revolution, but by and large, the full catalog you would find on my own store.
awesome. Spencer, thank you so much for your time today. It's been a real pleasure to chat with you, get a insight into your design process, and hear about your catalog. So yeah, thank you for talking to me.
Thank you so much for having me. This was a blast. I loved it.
All right. We'll see you at the next big event, and definitely when I get around to playing Rune, I will let you know.
Yeah,
But
let me know.
uh, uh,
Tell me how many times you died.
all right. Thank you everyone for watching this video.